He is serving his second term as state auditor, and before that he served in the Kentucky House of Representatives. Now he's in a crowded Republican field that wants to be the next governor. We'll talk about a variety of topics with Mike Harmon tonight on Issues and Answers, the Mountain Edition.
Everything you love about TV and more. Live, recorded, on demand, all in HD. Plus, easily find and watch your favorite shows. Anywhere, on any device. Great for the entire family and easy to use.
State Auditor Mike Harmon, our guest tonight on Issues and Answers. Good to have you in person.
So glad to be here.
Well, obviously the big story the last more than a month now in eastern Kentucky has been the devastating flooding. As an observer looking in, are you pleased with the state and federal response so far?
I think for the most part it's good. You know, I know I've talked to several people about maybe the federal response hasn't been quite as good. You know, there's some concerns about having some of the FEMA applications being initially rejected, and what I tell everybody, I just encourage them, like everybody else, to reapply, to appeal. If they have concerns, reach out to their state representative, their state senator, and have them run it through constituent services. You know, I was 13 years in the House prior to becoming state auditor, and I know constituent services does a fantastic job.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would argue that the governor has faced quite a bit during his term in office. Are you ready for that challenge?
Yes, yes I am. Of course, you know, I jokingly say that of the people that are in the race currently, I'm the oldest, I'm the most experienced, and I'm the funniest. And I told that to one old fella, and he said, well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, so.
There you go. Well, speaking of the governor, how do you think he's handled not only this disaster, but the tornado outbreak less than a year ago in western Kentucky?
You know, I think the tornado and the flood, I think he's handled reasonably well. Obviously, my big concern was how he handled the COVID epidemic, how he shut down businesses, and how, you know, unfortunately he, sent state police out to people's churches to try to shut them down while they left the abortion clinics open. So on that aspect, I don't think he did a very good job.
Yeah. Well, many people are concerned about housing for flood victims
Yes.
right now, especially, as colder weather arrives. Some were upset the issue wasn't addressed more in the recent special session.
Right.
Is there anything you would have done differently as far as the flood response goes if you were in office right now as governor?
Well, I think a lot of what we need to look at going forward, we need to see is there. I mean, I know we're not going to completely eliminate flooding. I think people may forget that I actually lost a car in high water back in 2019 coming back from Pikeville going through McGoffin County.
I had forgotten about that.
But, I don't know if we're going to completely eliminate it, but we need, looking forward, to figure out what we can do to minimize the flooding in situations like this, as well as we rebuild, make sure that our homes are situated in such a way that, if a flood comes, it won't necessarily impact them as thoroughly as it did this time.
Now, remind me how you got caught up in flooding.
Well, I was coming back from an event in Pikeville. They diverted me off the Mountain Parkway to avoid the mudslide, but they put me right into high water, and I jokingly say I spent the whole night, which I did, with full suit tie, wet socks, no shoes. And it was kind of funny. I actually, when I was at a rescue, thankfully no one in that flood, no one got hurt that I was aware of, but ended up running into, at the rescue area, some fellow wanted to introduce me to his wife, and I was like, hey, I'm Mike Harmon, Kentucky State Auditor. And she said, Mike Harmon, we got a Mike Harmon here. And I said, you do? I said, yeah, but he's a mortician. And I looked right at her and I said, well, that's where we differ. Everybody's dying to see him. No one's dying to see me, so the auditor, so.
It does seem like we're having more disasters, more flooding, tornadoes. A lot of people blame that on climate change. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm not so sure that climate change is causing it, other than the fact that you know, our climate has always changed. I mean, from the standpoint of you look at, I remember in the 70s, the early 70s, I was pretty young, but I mean, there was quite a few tornadoes that came through a night, I think in either 72, 73. I think there was like 13 of them at that time. So climate changes. I remember as a kid that we had snow for like a month. And then I remember there was a big period of time where we didn't, and then we've had a couple of years where we've had ice storms. So, you know, it's like anything else, this old world changes.
Yeah. So let's talk about the governor's race.
Yes.
You jumped in, one of the first, if not the first.
Yes.
I can't remember exactly, but why did you want to jump in so early?
Well, I wanted to jump in so early because, you know, I tell everybody, well, why would you get involved in the first place? And, you know, I'm a Christian, and I'm a husband, and I'm a father, and I'm a grandfather. And I want my kids and my grandkids, and hopefully someday my great-grandkids, to live in a state and hopefully a nation where they feel like they can accomplish anything. You know, and sadly our current governor's put so much focus over fear over freedom. You know, he focused on fear over freedom when he shut down businesses, focused on fear over freedom when he shut down unemployment offices, and he even focused on fear over freedom when, as I said earlier, you know, he sent the state police out to people's churches to try to shut them down, even though he left open the abortion clinic. So to me, I felt like it was important to jump in early. I didn't want to like tiptoe around it. I wanted people to know that was my intent.
Yeah. Obviously, it's a crowded field. It may get even...
No more than 40 or 50. So.
Well, it may get even more crowded. Do you think that could backfire on Republicans with so many in the primary swinging at each other? You
know, I think it's important. You know, I've talked about this before. Iron sharpens iron, and you know, we're gonna work hard. We're gonna have a good competition. But when it's all said and done, when it's over, as Republicans, we've all got to come together, because, you know, a house divided can't stand. And the one thing we need to do is to make sure, no disrespect to our current governor, but make sure that Andy Beshear is a one-term governor, just because, as I said earlier, he put so much of focus over fear over freedom.
So would you pledge to support anyone that comes out of the primary if it's not you?
Yes, I already have, actually.
Okay. So with this crowded field, how do you plan to make yourself stand out above the others? Sure.
Well, what I've always done, I've traveled the state multiple times, visiting with multiple individuals. I believe, you know, in working with people. I've told people before, I'll travel 2 hours to talk to 2 people, and I've done that more times than I care to mention. But that's the way I do, investing in people. Now, obviously, we've got to put other things in place, but investing in people. As I said earlier, you know, I was 13 years in the Kentucky House prior to doing this. I've 7 years, almost 8 years as auditor. This is actually my 4th statewide race. I don't know if you recall, but back in 2015 when I first became auditor, I only had 45,000 going against Adam Elin, who had 800,000, who Rachel Maddow described as the next up-and-coming Southern Democrat, and I was blessed to be the first Republican auditor elected since 1967. When I first entered the House, I was the first Republican elected in Boyle County to State House in 102 years. So, but we serve everybody, you know, but obviously we're running a Republican primary.
And where are you from originally?
Originally Bergen, over in Mercer County. Now we moved over to Junction City, the big city of Junction City, in the same county as Danville, Boyle County, when I was entering the 6th grade.
Okay. One of your opponents in the primary, the Attorney General, Daniel Cameron, has already received the endorsement of former President Trump. Are you upset or happy that you didn't get his endorsement?
No, certainly I would have loved to have had the endorsement of President Trump, and Daniel's a wonderful individual, you know, a friend of mine. Of course, you know, I'm friends with all the people in there. But, you know, it's one of those things where Daniel got it, and we will move on.
Okay. Speaking of former President Trump, would you support him if he runs for president again?
Oh, definitely. I mean, President Trump did an exceptional job as president. Certainly, we wished he would have controlled the rhetoric just a little bit, but I've jokingly told people, you know, bring back the mean tweets and the low gas and the low inflation, and I think people would be happy to see low gas and low inflation again, unlike what we have currently.
What do you think about the FBI raid in Mar-a-Lago. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I thought it was sad. I mean, I thought it was sad that, you know, for the first time ever, we've raided the home of a previous president. And, you know, it's one of those things that was historic, something that really shouldn't have been done. I mean, my understanding is there was some cooperation. There might have been some disagreement, but they were working even together, even as early as to June, you know. So I didn't feel like that it was necessary, and it seemed, at least on the surface, to be politically motivated.
Doesn't concern you that he may have had classified documents at his home?
Well, I mean, it does concern me, but, you know, there's some debate as to whether or not they were actually classified or he had already declassified them. My understanding, President Obama took quite a few files as well. My understanding is, you know, even, you know, previous presidents take files. And this has always been something that's worked out between the National Archives, you know, and it's just unfortunate that it's come to this when you had so many other things, whether it's the Hunter Biden, whether it was, you know, any of that stuff that just seems like that they've ignored.
So you feel it was politically motivated, this raid?
I feel like it certainly looks like it was politically motivated. I can't speak to their intent, but on the surface it does look like it's politically motivated.
Okay. There's some speculation that the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade might actually hurt Republicans nationally. What are your thoughts on that? You
know, that's possible, but, you know, the pro-life issue is something that all of us, myself included, you know, as Republicans, but the pro-life issue was one of the reasons that I got involved. And one of the reasons that I worked so hard over the years, I mean, it's more than that, but pro-life was kind of what got me involved in politics in the first place. And so to us, it was joyous. But a lot of people think that, you know, it just ends abortion. It doesn't end abortion. It just returns it back to the state. Very similar, you know, we talk about the Yes for Life amendment, which is ballot amendment 2 in Kentucky. We think that's important, but there's a lot of misunderstanding in that as well. Really all that does is say that the judiciary can't find, you know, an inherent right to an abortion or even an inherent right to have an abortion paid for by tax dollars. It doesn't change laws in the past, it doesn't change laws in the future, it puts it back in the hands of the people and by extension the legislators that they elect.
So are you against abortion, period, even in cases like rape and incest? You
know, I think from the standpoint of like the mother's lives in danger, the other one is those other two issues. Certainly they are a very small, even if you wrap them all, they're a very small percentage, and what has happened is they have used that as an excuse to have, you know, abortion on demand, even in some states wanting it all the way up to the 9th month. Or right before the child's being born. So in those particular instances, you know, you still have a life. You still have a life. So it is something that tears at all of us. You know?
So it is effectively banned now in Kentucky?
Right now. I mean, it's still under challenge, but as of right now, it is still banned, yes.
And you obviously support that moving forward?
You know, I do. I do. I mean, I'm pro-life, you know, through and through. Certainly, I understand the concerns, and I think those concerns can be discussed. You know, the big thing that I'd said up to this point, you know, if you've got, you know, a bus of 100 kids that are on a cliff, and you know, you can't save all 100, but you can save 99, but the balance of it, it's not going to work. You know, if you can't save that one, I'm going to save that 99. I'm going to mourn that one. But I'm going to save that 99 if I can.
So what would be your goals specifically for Eastern Kentucky, the mountains, if you were elected governor?
Well, I think it's multiple. I mean, for one thing, I know the General Assembly thankfully has already moved towards eliminating the income tax, which I think is good for the entire state, but it's also good for Eastern Kentucky. That provides additional incentive. I think certainly we need to put you know, we were talking about climate change earlier, but we need to put a focus back on our fossil fuels until we get all the other stuff. We've got to be all the above energy policy. And, you know, and unfortunately, the other side of the aisle has attacked coal and has attacked oil, has attacked gas, and we've seen an increase in the prices of things. Now, the other thing is, you know, we talk a lot about these big, you know, companies coming in, bringing thousands of jobs, or, you know, 1,000. Those are great. But I also think that we need to focus on having areas, especially in Eastern Kentucky, of businesses, smaller businesses, 100, between 100 and 500, And the reason that is, over in Danville, I've seen several times where you have a factory maybe 500 or 1,000 people, and when it folds, it creates a vacuum. And we need to make sure that we get Eastern Kentucky's economy up. We need to make sure that, we get water and sewer. And like I mentioned earlier, we need to help Eastern Kentucky from the standpoint of advanced planning to try to make sure that we minimize floods going forward.
Yeah. The governor just recently participated in a big groundbreaking out in Western Kentucky for an electric battery plant. Would you support projects like that?
Oh, definitely for Kentucky, but also for Eastern Kentucky. I know they've had a couple of things that they thought was going to come about that didn't, but we need to make sure that there's jobs available for this area so people don't have to drive an hour or 2 or 3, to get to work.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of your work as auditor.
Sure.
You did a 2020 special examination of select county attorney offices, which did lead to the indictment of former Lawrence County Attorney Mike Hogan. So tell me about that and how that came about.
Sure. Well, we did a special exam, as you said, of county attorneys. We looked at 9. We did an initial survey of 16. We narrowed it down to 9, and we actually had 3 referrals from it. One of them was, you indicated, the Lawrence County Attorney, Mike Hogan. When we went in, we found out that he was paying bonuses. He'd paid in a 2-year period that we looked about $134,000 in bonuses, which was bad enough because Section 3 of Kentucky Constitution, for the most part, prohibits the payment of bonuses. But of that $134,000, he had paid about 94% of those to his wife, who also had a salary of $40,000 a year. So over a 2-year period, she was paid a little over $120-some thousand. By comparison, you had one assistant county attorney that over a 2-year period got about $650. Another one got a little over $2,000. So we thought that strange and odd, so we referred that to the FBI, and they came in and they did some additional investigation, and they actually, according to them, alleged that Mike Hogan had paid his wife since 2013 to the dates that we were looking at, because they went further back, alleged that he paid a little over I think it was $373,000 if I remember correctly. So they actually indicted him and his wife. My understanding, both of them have pled guilty, and they were originally supposed to be sentenced a month or 2 ago, but they delayed that. I think the new sentencing is coming up either this month or next month, if I remember correctly. So.
Yeah, I don't remember quite the new date for that either.
But now, that one was interesting, but the one that was also interesting was the Boyd County Child Support Enforcement Officer. I think we may have even talked about that sometime before, but she had, our auditors had just gone in and just asked for bank statements, as I understand. And as I understand, she came in the next day with those checking statements, talked to the county attorney and said, I know why they're here, I've been stealing. So I kind of considered that our Perry Mason moment. But they just shined just a little bit of sunlight, and they confessed. But I told that to one of our new auditors that it was a Perry Mason moment, and she was like, "Who's Perry Mason?" So I was like, "Now I feel old."
That would be the response from my newsroom as well.
Yes, and now I feel old. But
yes. Well, you want to have all Kentucky County attorney audits annually, is that right?
Right now, what we're doing after that, we've worked hand in hand with the county attorney associations, and what we have done, a lot of the county attorneys, especially if they're smaller, they didn't even do a financial statement. So what we have worked with them, passed House Bill 782 just this last session, and what it does, it establishes some end of term reporting. It also establishes some financial reporting, every year. And then right now what we're doing is a pilot project. In addition to that legislation, we're doing a pilot project with 23 county attorneys. Actually, we've got 3 of them in this area. Bill, Clay, and Lee have volunteered to do this AUP, an agreed upon procedure, which is, it's not, you could kind of call it a light audit. It's not exactly that, but it does help us try to get county attorneys, and almost the majority of them do a great job, but there was so little guidance to them. So we would just want to try to get them all in kind of a uniform type reporting and provide additional guidance.
Okay. Now, I know this is something we talked about last time, a big topic, the unemployment insurance system. I know you've continuously worked on that.
Yes.
Tell me the latest on that, and have you seen any improvements since
Sure.
the last time we talked?
Well, you know, we see this in our what we call our statewide single audit of Kentucky, which is the statewide audit. And that basically, volume 1 of that looks more at the financial statement and controls. Volume 2 looks specifically at federal compliance. So the ones we talked about, kind of the eyes popped out where we had the 400,000 unread emails that was sent to the unemployment assistant line, and 10 employees at the unemployment office or the Office of Unemployment that had applied for unemployment compensation even though they were still full-time employed and accessed their accounts even though they had been trained not to. Well, that was the previous year. Mm-hmm. So the year that we just released was ending fiscal June 30th, 2021. That one, we saw some improvement. We did see some improvement, but we still saw a high level of fraud. For instance, you know, a lot of the samples that we looked at, just as a percentage of the samples were high. Now, what we had found fraud-wise was about 118,000 in the sample we had looked at, but if you just looked at it as percentages, it was very high. Now, the other thing that we saw, there was still at the end of June, June 30th, 2021, 120,000 unemployment applications that had yet to be adjudicated. So that, you know, still kind of broke my heart in that regards. And we ended up, there was a lot more items that were material in nature, and what I mean is they received a lot more money. So, for instance, from 2 years ago, we've gotten about $10 billion more in federal aid, cash, non-cash awards, which was about $5 billion more than what we'd had in the year before. So when you have that much money coming through, the opportunity for fraud obviously jumps up significantly.
So what would you do as governor to fix these issues?
Well, you know, we've taken a step in the right direction in that we've put in place, or they have put in place, you know, some software to try to catch fraud. Obviously, we're going to have to do more. One of the things I definitely would not have done, I wouldn't have shut down the in-person unemployment offices, because what happened was we did have, the governor is correct, we did have an aging computer system. My understanding is it's still on the foundation of an old computer software language, COBOL. But you know, and we had concerns about that. We weren't operating and doing the security scans. But what happens is when you shut down all the in-person, it's kind of like if you're traveling down a 6-lane highway and you shut down 5 lanes and you try to channel it all through one lane. Well, what happens is it gets backed up and it doesn't travel very well. So one thing, we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't close down any of the in-person. But we need to make sure that we have a situation to where people can get, if they need unemployment. Now, I hope we have so much work available that we won't even have to worry about it, because it'll be so small, because I won't be shutting down businesses.
Well, and you said there's still hundreds still waiting
as of June 30th of 2021, which is what our period covered. At that time, there were still 120,000 unadjudicated applications.
120,000?
120,000.
Oh, my.
Yes.
Well, that says a lot.
Yes.
The governor, another topic, the governor created a task force to look at the pros and cons of medical marijuana. Mm-hmm. What's your position on that? You know,
the task force, you know, I think should have more involvement. If they're going to do it, you know, the General Assembly should be the one that you know, looks at that. But from a standpoint of medical marijuana, I think we do need to look at it. I do have concerns. I certainly am no way supportive of recreational marijuana, and I'm not quite there on medical. But in anything you do, you really should do at a federal level, getting it to be, if you're going to move in that direction, have it be a Schedule II drug, similar to, you know, some of the other things. But from a standpoint of doing it on a state, because people forget, you know, even these states that have made it quote unquote legal, it's still illegal. It's just that the states have agreed that they're not going to work and not going to prosecute. But if the feds one day decide, you know, we're going to prosecute all marijuana usage, whether it's medical or whether it's, you know, recreational, they could enforce those laws. So it's not technically legal, even if we as a state pass it.
So you're not ready to say I support medical marijuana yet?
No, but I am ready to say that we need to look at it and look at the research at it and see if there's some benefits. But people do need to understand that even though it's available in other states, it doesn't mean that it's legal, and it needs to be compared to other drugs in that regards. And if there's benefits for it, and the studies, bear that out. But we need to look at the pros and cons of it, and I think, depending on which side of the issue you're on, you look at only the pros or you only look at the cons, and there's some of both. So we just need to research it a little bit more and try to get on the same page.
Well, it's no secret Eastern Kentucky has a big drug problem.
They do.
Since the pandemic, it's gotten worse.
Yeah.
Overdoses or deaths are up. Fentanyl is a huge problem.
Yeah.
So what would you do as governor to address that problem?
Well, part of it is, part of it's a federal problem too, because, if we're not closing the borders, if people are flowing through the borders, a lot of the problems that we have is fentanyl crossing the borders and making its way even to Kentucky and others. Sad to say that fentanyl overdose, if my understanding is, for individuals between I think it's 18 and 45, that's the #1 killer. More so than COVID, more so than car wrecks, more so than anything. So we've got to put a strong focus on it. But there's a couple of different things from the fentanyl standpoint. Like I said, we've got to make sure, work with the president and see if we can, get him to shut down the border. And if he doesn't, we need to replace him. But from standpoint here, obviously treatment, counseling. My wife, she's a chaplain at the Isaiah House Drug Ministries over in that area, and have done that for several years. And of course, serving the Lord and also trying to help people, get off the addiction, because that's what most people need. People try to fill that emptiness in their heart with drugs or other issues, and if they'll, fill that heart with the Lord, that will help them work through things.
What do you feel has been the biggest failure of the Beshear administration?
Probably the biggest failure is how he addressed the COVID issue. I mean, from the standpoint, he didn't really work with the General Assembly. He shut down businesses. Like I said, he shut down the in-person unemployment offices. He sent state police. Why would you send state police to churches? So how he handled COVID was probably the biggest failure, I would say.
Well, obviously, the governor heard that criticism and the criticism that he did not work with legislators. Have you seen the relationship improve? Does he talk to you guys?
Well, to my understanding, it's gotten a little bit better. There was a cooperative working arrangements with both the tornado as well as, they just recently had the special session. The past, I think, was like $220 million worth of financial assistance. But you still see some bucking up between them, but I think he's working better. Is he working well? I don't know if I can say, but working better. That he really criticized the General Assembly for putting back, in the Budget Reserve Trust Fund well over $1 billion. Well, if they had not done that, we would not have had the money to be able to help Eastern Kentucky. And so he had criticized them about that beforehand, and then after the floods, it ended up being a wise thing for the General Assembly to do.
Just a few seconds left. The
Sure.
governor says almost every stop, our economy's on fire. You agree with that?
Well, if you mean it's a dumpster fire, I would probably agree with it, but definitely. I mean, if you look at the unemployment rate, it's low, but if you look at the labor participation rate, it is also significantly lower than pre-COVID. And that's what you really have to look at, is the labor participation rate.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time on Issues and Answers.